It is a great pleasure to welcome once again to the show Kevin, California. He is a singer-songwriter from Canada, and he is currently going on tour to perform his EP, Timeless. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining the show once again.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Mhm. So the last time we talked to each other was 3 years ago, and you were amongst the first people to be the guests on my show. So, what has changed since 2020?
Um, well, since then, I was probably on your podcast right when I released that Timeless album. And then I had a bunch of shows lined up, but unfortunately they were canceled because of the pandemic. And so I'm just getting kind of the steam, kind of getting momentum again to get everything going again. So this year I planned about 6 months of touring just around Ontario and Quebec,
Wow.
and maybe I'll take this tour to some other provinces next year. I'm not sure, but it's a possibility. So yeah, just trying to get momentum again. It was hard to get that first show and line everything up again for that first show, but then once I got the first show under my belt, then everything else kind of fell into place. And so far I'm kind of halfway through all these shows in Ontario and Quebec that I have booked, and they've been going really well. I really am happy with how they've been going. I had a show yesterday in Bowmanville, which is just about 100 kilometers east of Toronto, and I got my first uh, fan gift.
Mm,
A little dreamer made me a bracelet and gave it to me at my show, so that was really special.
glad to hear it. Yeah. When and where was your first show?
You mean during this tour?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my first show was, oh, let me think. Oh, it was on April 1st, uh, in Niagara Falls at Blackburn Brew House.
Mm,
And yeah, that was pretty special, especially since, you know, my first EP, Dear Mom, was dedicated to my late sister, and that was actually her birthday. So I kind of got back on tour performing on her birthday. So I don't know how much you believe in signs or some and things like that, but it definitely seemed like someone was looking over me during that time. So it was super special. I didn't even plan for that date. I had just asked the venue, when's their earliest available date, and they gave me that date. So yeah, the tour started off kind of with that little bit of magic, and it's been helping me along the way.
oh, that's cool. Yeah. So, so
In
you name,
inspiration, actually, I would say, instead of magic.
mhm. So you name your previous EP "Dear Mom," and it's dedicated to your sister. Yeah. Tell me about her.
Yes, I guess that's a bit confusing. She was a lot older than me, like 8 years older, so she was kind of like mom number two in the sense that she was kind of overprotective, and
Oh,
but in a good way, and kind of looking out for me. I don't know if you have any siblings that are a lot older than you, but that's kind of the role that the oldest one takes care of the youngest and things like that. And yeah, so I wrote that EP. I mean, the song "Dear Mom" was originally inspired by something I wrote to my mom, and for either her birthday or for Mother's Day, I can't remember. I came across it in something, in like an email I wrote to her, and I said, "Oh, those would be good lyrics." Pulled out my guitar and I started playing some chords, and then before I knew it, I was kind of on my way to writing the song. So it started as a dedication to my actual mom, and then just around that time of that EP was I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil, um, and I just wanted to. She left behind a son of hers who was pretty young at the age. And so it was kind of like what I imagined he would say to her, my late sister, if he could formulate the words. That was kind of the how I dedicated that album to her.
Well, that's very sweet.
If that
Yeah. Do you plan to perform the songs from that EP in your upcoming gigs?
so I've released 12 songs so far, two EPs and two singles. And I like to play the majority of those songs live. So I definitely performed Dear Mom live. Um, and on that April 1st show, it was a bit of it was a special moment when I actually played that song. I'm surprised they even got through it. That's the thing, is like when you're a performer, you write songs that are really personal, and you usually write when, like, if you're writing alone, not when you're co-writing, but when you're writing alone, you get really personal because you escape from the world. But then if you follow through on recording it and then follow through again on releasing it, it becomes something that was so personal, it becomes very public. And that's something I'm kind of learning how to deal with as I continue on in this artistry, because at first I didn't realize like how that all works. And so I'm trying to make sure that I still continue to be as sincere and you know as honest and stuff as possible as a writer, but also keeping in mind that this is something for the public, so it's got to be like a fine balance of what they can handle and what you can handle, giving out, because there's definitely some parts that you need to keep to yourself, and other parts you need to share, because that's really why people go to music, is because they want to feel like they're not alone, right? So a lot of times, people will see in lyrics, or at least I did when I was growing up and being turned on to music, like when you're going through something, and everybody's kind of going through their everyday tasks of life, and they're not really getting into the deep parts of it. Music and art and other forms of art will help you realize that other people deep down inside are kind of feeling the same.
Yeah, I understand. Speaking of, do you have any new music on the works?
Yeah, so I've, like, especially during the pandemic, I spent a lot of time, um just trying new things, and I had a lot of, because I didn't have to think too much about like performing and booking and rehearsing and all that stuff for shows. It gave me kind of a big open time frame where I could just experiment. And so I wrote quite a bit. Sometimes I didn't write as much. It depended on the day, but I was doing a lot of practicing of like songs and cover songs that I never would do before too, just trying to expand my musical ability. But then when it came down to writing, yeah, I wrote a lot. But the thing is the songs aren't usually done until, I don't know, a handful of years, where I kind of have to rewrite them and comb through them, and just keep on practicing and practicing until there's kind of a moment when they're done, when a song is done. Like, I can't really pinpoint what makes it done, but I'll be playing and play it and play it and rewriting and rewrite it, like, I don't know, 100 times. And then the one time I'll just be like, okay, yeah, it's done. And then it's pretty much when I replay the song, if I don't make too many changes, like, then I know it's done, right? Like, there's nothing I can think of that needs to be changed or worked on. That's when I know it's done. But so, yeah, I've worked on a handful of, not a handful of songs. Like, I have like 7 writing books that I've pretty much filled, not all during the pandemic, but over the years. And I have probably, I would say about 8 songs that might be ready for recording. But again, recording is a whole nother logistical issue that I need to tackle. So I've started to source out a couple studios and a couple people I want to work with. But that again, just this summer, I started meeting some people and like producers, engineers, other musicians, and um, yeah, I was fortunate to meet on this tour in Sault Ste. Marie, the lead singer of. Actually, I met the guitarist as well, the lead singer and guitarist from Trouble Charger. So the lead singer was Greg Norrie, and the guitarist Brad Priddle. And so that was quite an inspiration. And I went to see their studio. So I'd like to follow up with them and see, I don't know, maybe I can do a bit of a retreat recording where I go somewhere out of my home space to another town, another city, and just focus on recording. So yeah, I'd hope to get some new songs out to you soon, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so it might be a while.
I understand. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about some of the covers that you've done.
Yeah, so some covers that I perform live are My Wrecking Ball by Ryan Adams. Ryan, not Brian. Ryan Adams. I also perform Synthetica by Metric, Wheat Kings by Tragically Hip, Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan, The Wind Cries Mary by Jimi Hendrix, Simple Man by Leonard Skinner. What else? Working Class Hero by John Lennon. So yeah, you can see I'm a little bit inspired by kind of the 60s movement and a lot of the artists of that time. I think singer and songwriters really had their heyday around that time too. So since I'm a singer and songwriter, I lean towards that era of music. But like I said, like Metric, Synthetica, it's a bit more recent. Same with the Ryan Adams cover. So those are some of the covers that I have other covers as well, but those are the ones that I've been performing live.
Let's see. Yeah. Do you find the music of the period or the ethos of the musicians of that period to be more appealing to you?
Um, yeah, it was kind of the apex of rock and roll before it had like synthetic, uh, like keyboard synth sounds and all this, right? Like the 2000s and later has a lot of more like synth driven, and because of digital recording you can have 100 or more. I'm not really sure exactly what's the limit in like Pro Tools or something. You can have so many tracks. So I remember seeing Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People, and because like with Logic Pro, you would get this like template. It was an example of how they produced the song, right? And I'm not sure if it was that song specifically or a different one. And you could see like one track would just be like one little synthetic noise, and it wouldn't even go the whole song. It might just come once in like at like 45 seconds into the song and never again. And that's the whole track, right? So in the 60s and 70s, they were using analog and they were using tape, and tape, those big rolls of tape, those are really expensive to create. So, and each of them, I think, I'm not totally sure with the technicalities of that type of recording because I kind of learned the digital way first. But I believe like each one of those tapes would kind of consist of a track. So they didn't really have like 100 rolls of tape for just one song, right? So the music of that era, the recordings of that era, like pre, I guess, the 80s, you would have really kind of your basic instruments. They're really important, like the song, the lyrics, and the performances, right? So there was a little bit less kind of cloud into the recordings, like less fog, less, now there seems to be like kind of a wall of sound that comes in a song. There's really like no empty space. There's it's kind of always has there it's kind of always at threshold. So I just like that because of the technology of that era, there was a bit more focus on the performance and the songs because they were limited to how many tracks they had. Yeah, they were using in recording.
Yeah,
So it kind of brings it back to because I'm a solo artist and there's only so much noise I can make, it kind of I relate to it because I'm kind of limited, not because of technology, but because I'm one person. Yeah.
yeah, I get it. Although, yeah, the recording technique known as the wall of sound is actually kind of a 60s invention, right? The person who pioneered it is Phil Spector.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, and
Oh
I think the peak of what I would call singer-songwriter music is somewhere in the late 90s and mid 70s, with people like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and everybody. Yeah, yeah, they
yeah.
did.
I mean, even if the wall of sound was kind of invented, Phil Spector, what did he work on? Did he work with the Beach Boys or who is he?
I'm not sure. I think well, he did work with John Lennon when after the
Oh,
Beatles broke up.
okay. So it
Imagine
gets,
album, I suppose.
yeah, which I think John Lennon released that stuff kind of closer to the 80s, right? So the technology was starting to catch up around that time, right? And even if it was kind of invented in the, let's say, late 60s or something, it wasn't popular and it wasn't really accessible by too many people. But now with the digital recording and it's a lot cheaper, I think there's like a huge amount of music from all different genres and all different levels that are kind of following that wall of sound idea. Whereas if Phil Spector kind of started that, he was probably like one of the few who was kind of doing it, and everybody was still kind of making that kind of bare bones, raw, still kind of recording. I think because it kind of takes a time, it takes a bit of time before becomes popular and everybody follows. But I'm not a music historian, so I don't know. But I'm just imagining that now it's been 50 years since then or plus. So now it's really become popular and accessible, and you're kind of hearing it a lot more often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm guessing you find to be like a crutch for, I guess, musicians who may not be as creative or as innovative with their sounds and style. Is that the case?
Uh, well, there's a certain play, and as far as the indie music, I try to produce my music, to a certain extent. Like I could just set up a mic and record voice and one instrument, right? But a lot of my songs will have, let's say, up to 40 tracks in like Pro Tools or something like that. So I would say, um, still I still do like producing music to a certain extent, and not so bare boned either as far as like on the indie level goes. Pop music is way more tracks. But do I like people who are a bit more uh, you know like less produced and stuff like that? Yeah, I probably do. Because often when I listen to a song, if I feel like it's something I can reproduce, like in a cover, and I'll usually learn the song, and learning the song means listening to it over and over and over again. And then after you do that, you become more of a fan of their music. But for example, if you listen to Synthetica by Metric, it's very produced and it has a lot of synth sounds and stuff like that. And they're really good at making kind of like a dance music kind of electronic sound, but also with rock and roll. And so, but of all the cover songs that I listed off, it's probably the one that is the most produced, whereas the other songs are a little bit more kind of bare boned, like, you know, uh, a singer, guitarist, or a pianist with like, a rhythm section, maybe max up to, 5 people in the band. So yeah, you're probably right. I kind of lead towards the music that I feel like I can reproduce to a certain level.
I see.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Although I would raise, a defense of like synthesized music in that in the 70s, I mean, David Bowie and Brian Eno did those magnificent albums in Berlin, right? Low and Heroes and Larger. I mean, especially the synthesizer led tracks are just wonderful. There's Vasava and there's Neukölln in Low and Heroes respectively, and in the 80s, new wave is the music genre or movement known as new wave is full of creative people like New Order and Talking Heads, and I would say Tears for Fears, they are included in it too. And rather than using the newfound technology as a crutch, they use it as an extended limb really to expand their sonic capabilities.
Yeah, you're right. And I love that stuff. I'm a big fan of David Bowie. And and yeah, the music that people make using those tools is fantastic, for sure. I would just say that and maybe in the future I will use some more of it, but I think just given my circumstances, I've been a little bit um it's a lot of too, it has to do with kind of like, to be honest, like budget constraints, because
Yeah.
doing all those extra tracks, doing all those extra sounds, it takes time, it takes trial and error, it takes people who can produce the sound, whether it's me or I have to work with musicians that can do that. So um, being an indie artist, I kind of have to do the best with what I can, right? I think if I was an indie band and I had multiple members in my band, and each of us were experimenting with things, like maybe it would be more feasible on a budget level to like introduce those things. But because I'm a singer-songwriter producer, I focus on kind of what I can bring to the table the most, and that's the singing, that's the words, the compositions, um, those kind of things. And probably, to be honest, like by the time that's all done, I'm kind of exhausted, and I kind of I try to stick with um I just want to get it out to people and the best that I can. And if one of my songs is covered by someone, I know Gordon Lightfoot's "If You Could Read My Mind" was like, it became popularized by a techno dance version of it, and it's really surprised him when that happened. But it became his probably most popular song ever, and it was popularized by dance, electronic, synthetic music. And he was a guy with like an acoustic guitar, and maybe he had a rhythm section, and that was it. So I think, like, I don't know what Gordon was thinking at the time. I was fortunate enough to see him at the CNE a few months ago before he passed. And like, I don't know what he was thinking when he was writing, or what maybe stopped him from, because Neil Young was a bit of a singer-songwriter who in his album. I think it's called Trance or something.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
remember that one.
yeah, and he went really synthetic, and the album, I or the label like sued him or something for not making Neil Young records, and so he went into that change. But I think Gordon Lightfoot kind of stuck with his kind of like folky roots throughout. And I don't know if it was the same idea. Like he spent so much time writing those lyrics, composing those words, that he just kind of, by the end of it, he couldn't really think of anything else more to do with it. He just wanted to record it, you know. Um, so and but I watched a documentary of Gordon's recently, and he was talking about how like Drake is a fantastic artist and like it's totally different genre than his, but he can appreciate those other pieces of art, and so can I. I grew up listening to a lot of electronic like EDM music, and I saw like Fatboy Slim on Bondi Beach. I saw like Tiesto and Vegas. Like I was definitely inspired by music that is different than what I record. I think that's funny that a lot of people, when they meet me and they'll ask me like what kind of music I like and let's do, and when I say something like that, they're so surprised. But when I was really young, I had a family friend tell me that she said, if you want to be a good musician, you have to listen to all types of music. And that really stuck with me because really, and that's probably what they're trying to do right now with AI, is they're just trying to give the computer as much information and as many different composition pieces so it kind of scrambles it all together and makes something new. Really, that's what a composition, they're composites, there's pieces from here to here and it's all put together, right? So I think the wider um the lens or the ears, or whatever, that what you listen to is like, for an artist, I think the more unique the music will be. That's not to say that my music is like super unique, but I definitely strive to make unique music. And I think the only way to do that is by opening up to as wide of a range of music as you can, and wide of genres as possible. I think I think particularly musicians are really good at that. Maybe sometimes maybe fans kind of like they have their one specific genre and they stick to it, and that's okay because they're fans. They're not reproducing this music, so they don't really need to study it as well. It's kind of like if you want to be a teacher, you really have to understand the subject way more than if you're just the student, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's the job of the musician to try to ingest as many different types of music as possible so you can create something unique.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Although I take your point in that there was a time when, um, I guess what you call it, acoustic music, as in music that is played or composed without the use of electronic effects and instruments, were more popular, and the ones that are more electronic were a bit more underground. But these days, is the opposite. Like the ones that the kind of music that is acoustic and organic, so to speak, is more often associated with indie and the popular music these days. It's mostly driven by electronic sounds and effects.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that for sure. Like, definitely, alternative is more popular than folk if you look at, like, let's say a listener base, just in terms of numbers. So, yeah, I would agree with that. Why is Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, like I said, in the 60s that probably wasn't the case just because of technology didn't really allow it, right? There wasn't as many people making it and stuff. There's also, like, you were talking about a crutch, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you use it, you can also like hide behind it a little bit, right? Like, if you're like, so for example, some of my songs are quite produced on an indie level, and now I'm performing them solo right now. So I've noticed that I really have to make sure that like my voice is in tune to the best that I can make it, and like I have really good tone when I perform, and there's a lot of emotion behind each line that is delivered. And if there's only one instrument that I'm playing, like I have to play that instrument like I've never played it. Like it's the last time I'm gonna play it. It's just the best you can. So there's it's a bit more challenging maybe to perform something when it's stripped down. Like for example, just to bring it back to metric, because Emily Haynes, she went and did a solo project, and I remember seeing her perform it on like the Strombo show, and she's like, "This is so hard. Like this is really difficult. I don't know why I'm doing this." Right? Because when she's there alone with her piano, it's raw. There's like nothing to hide behind, right? But when you have other band members who are making a lot of noise. That's the thing, is I grew up playing in bands, and I was mainly a guitarist first. And so when all of a sudden I started leaning towards the center part of the stage and being like more and more a solo artist, wow, I knew I had to bring up my craft a ton. And moving to LA for that bit of time really helped, because I was never surrounded by such talented musicians in my life. Because a lot of people who are really focused on it, like, will go to an epicenter of music, whether it's like Toronto, New York, LA, Nashville, um, England, there's certain places. I always used to say, like, if you want to fish, you got to go to the ocean, right? So like the musicians who really want to, catch on, they'll be there. And wow, did it push me and humble me, right? And so I always kind of keep that in my mind, when I'm practicing, and try to push myself to be the best I can at my craft.
Mhm. So thus far, you're on the road. So what is the best part and the worst part of uh, going on tour as a musician?
Yeah. So the last time I toured, which was a few years ago, and it was I was doing a lot of kind of like one night shows and then driving right back, which is called, I call it hubbing. I learned that from a book I read about um, how to be a booking agent. Really good for anybody out there if they're listening and learning how to want to book their own shows. I forget who wrote the book, but anyways, she so this was after my last tour. I read this book, and she said, "Don't hub." And I was trying to think about, like, what does that mean? And I think that means like going to a place, playing once, and coming back. Now I still do those shows, because it's hard to line up a bunch of consecutive shows, like when you're up and coming and you're trying to make a name for yourself. So um but I did learn that I did 7 shows in 10 days recently in Northern Ontario. And I had no clue what to expect from it. I didn't know if my voice would last. Now, my voice did crack once or twice just near the end on the last few shows. But all in all, I was able to handle it. And I remember seeing an interview about the Beatles. They're like, we are doing 23 shows in 30 days or something. Like, I think it's like if you're learning snowboarding, if you just go snowboard once a year, by the time you go your second year, you're going to forget everything from what you learned 364 days before, right? But if you're going on a vacation for like 2 weeks and you're snowboarding for 10 days in those 2 weeks, your learning curve is going to be much steeper, and you're going to learn a lot more. So what I've learned is that by touring um, consecutive shows, so now I can say I've done 7 shows in 10 days. My next goal would be to do like 14 shows in 20 days. And then after that, maybe just keep on multiplying it. But so my favorite part is actually being on the road. and doing consecutive shows, meeting people. Staying at hotels is a bit lonely, but it also keeps you focused on what you're doing. It's kind of like you're working for a corporation and they send you on the road, right? There's really nothing to do except what you're there to do. So uh, it makes me, I got inspired by certain things that happen. Like, for example, I played on this riverfront in Perry Sound, and while during my set there was a train that went by, and I had to pause for like 5 to 10 minutes because it was too loud to perform over. But I might write a song about that, called Train City. And now this is on document, and that, or this is documented. Who knows if this will happen? But that was like an inspiring moment. Now, of course, that can happen if you just go do a show and come back. But I don't know. So the thing I've learned is that I like doing consecutive shows. I like being on tour. I like how much I improve in my performance by doing consecutive shows. And the thing I don't like about touring is I would say like doing a show and having to drive back another like 2, 3 hours after a performance. Like the one thing I like is after I perform to have my hotel as close as possible to the show so I can rest right away. And the thing with hubbing, which is when you perform kind of a one night and then go back to where you're from, you don't have that rest. And also you don't get a chance to experience the people and the culture of that area and network and relate to them and stuff as much because you're kind of pretty quickly packing up and heading home for your long drive, right? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course you mentioned the Beatles, and I think it is the case that they made some of their weirdest music, and some would say their best music when they're not on tour. When they say that, well, we're gonna stop touring, and we're gonna just continue to make music from now on, and that's the beginning of their experimental, so to speak, period, right?
Yeah, and you can, to bring it back full circle to what we spoke about earlier in this conversation, how about produced music and stuff like that.
Mhm.
You can clearly notice the difference of their composing when they decided to stop touring for, I think, the like last 5 years of their band. It started to be a little bit more experimental, a lot more like multi-track layered and all this stuff because they didn't have to worry about how are these four people going to perform this live, right? So they could have endless amount of tracks, whatever their budget or their technology allowed, and they didn't have to worry about being able to reproduce that live. So um it it was cool that they did that because it gave us fans a chance to see like two sides of them, them writing songs that clearly are just kind of four instruments, four musicians performing, and then later on in their careers kind of seeing what they had deep down inside of their minds of how to create, and we got to hear things that probably we would never have heard if they didn't do that, because they probably would have still been more focused on how to reproduce a similar sound live, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So to conclude this conversation, which I'm enjoying very much, so I would like to ask you one question that I ask any and every musician who's been on this show. What does music mean to you?
Life. It's life. Who is it that I heard in a documentary? Not a documentary, but it was on a radio show, and I think it was Sting. Yeah, I think Sting was talking uh, to George Stroumboulopoulos, and he said that he doesn't know how long he would survive or last if he didn't have music. And so to me, music means life because um, one of the challenges in being a professional in music is just keep on playing, keep on
Mm.
doing it, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people start, a lot of people do a single, a lot of people do an album, and then they're done, you know? So the hardest thing in music is just to keep on playing, right? And I have found myself, which probably a lot of people feel, and I don't know if you have felt this in your academia, but you know, you'll question or you'll doubt or you'll hit a wall and you'll be like, oh, I don't know, or oh, it's too hard to continue, blah blah, blah. And like, you know, because you know, life is not a flat ground, you know, it's up and down, up and down. And every time that I've tried to turn my back on music, it like would not turn its back on me.
Mhm.
So like I would try, I'd be like, no, it's too hard, it's over, I'm done. Quit. But you know, like, but then somehow it still keeps on finding me. And you know, I don't know if that's a little bit of what destiny means or whatever, but I feel that there's a certain set of events that people go through that start to shape what their future looks like too.
Mhm.
And so to me, like just all the things that music was to me, growing up, and everything it's given to me along the way. And I've had so many different experiences from music that I really don't see a life without it. And I can't imagine myself like being one day like, yeah, I don't like music or I hate music or have like such a jaded mentality that I don't want to have anything to do with it. So for me, I think this is what I'm gonna do until I go, you know, this is what I'm gonna do, you know. So it's life. That's what it means to me.
Mhm. Well, on that wonderful note, thank you very much, Kevin, California, for joining the show once again.
Thank you, Chung, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to speak with you. You always get me to, I don't know, think and feel about what I'm doing, and it's a good reflection. You just have a good way of asking the right questions, so I appreciate the conversation.
Well, much appreciated. Have fun on the road, and we'll see each other again when you have new music coming out, I suppose.
Sounds good, and good luck with everything out there in Austria.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.